Alrighty, good evening and welcome. My name is Adrian Lee. I'm a medical oncologist at Royal North Shore Hospital. I'm also a board member of the Brain Cancer Group, and it is my privilege to welcome you all to the Brain Cancer Group's 7th awareness raising event held annually here at New South Wales Parliament House during Brain Cancer Action Week. We want to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we are meeting. We pay our respects to the elders past, present and emerging, and the elders from other communities who may be here today. Tonight's event will be recorded, so if there's any of you who feel uncomfortable about being recorded, please let Dennis know. We are, of course, most grateful to our parliamentary host, the member for Canterbury, the Honourable Sophie Cotsis, New South Wales Minister for Industrial Relations and Minister for Work, Health and Safety. I don't believe Sophie's here yet because she's probably caught up. I think just half an hour ago she was still speaking on the floor of the chamber, so she's very busy tonight. But nonetheless, we thank Sophie for her ongoing support, which began with our inaugural event here at Parliament House in 2016, and for hosting all subsequent events. Sophie, thank you for remaining a firm friend and supporter for the Brain Cancer Group. And hopefully we'll see a few more parliamentarians joining us, and we thank those who will be able to join us shortly as this is a very busy sitting week. We acknowledge the Brain Tumour Alliance Australia, BTAA, represented this evening by a number of their community members. BTAA and the Brain Cancer Group have forged a strong partnership, bringing to the general public, patients and colleagues, informative educational events such as our webinars on oligodendroglioma and meningioma, and an educational forum in May 2023 at North Shore Private Hospital. Also this October, TBCG will once again sponsor BTAA's Patient Forum, which will take place at the beginning of the Cogno ASM conference in Melbourne. We look forward to working closely with BTAA to bring more such events to the community. All will be filmed and available on our website. Speaking of other events, a lot is happening in May for the Brain Cancer Month. There are flyers describing other events happening, in particular May 17th, another patient education forum in collaboration with NSW NOG and the BTAA, as well as the 6th annual breakfast for brain cancer on May 24th, which is always a very pleasant, social and informative fundraising event. In November, we will advocate for brain cancer patients at the 2nd Head to the Hill event, initiated and organised by BTAA, where we and other brain cancer organisations around the country and the public will head to Parliament House in Canberra to take our message directly to our government and raise awareness. We will keep you posted via social media and our newsletter, and on event details and how you can also get involved. Once again, let me welcome all of our distinguished guests, our ambassadors, patients, families, business and community leaders, representatives of other brain cancer organisations, my fellow board members and team members of the Brain Cancer Group, and of course our distinguished speakers. And firstly, we will hear from the Brain Cancers Group, Dr. Helen Wheeler, medical oncologist from Royal North Shore Hospital, then Subo Thavaneswaran, medical oncologist at the King Hon Centre at St. Vincent's Hospital, and Associate Professor Michael Back, radiation oncologist at Royal North Shore Hospital as well. And a special mention to our community speaker, Joanne Hüging, who will generously share her story as a carer. I'm sure I speak for all here when I say very much looking forward to hearing from all our speakers tonight. Following the presentations, we encourage you to get involved in our Q&A session before we conclude the official evening and head out to the foyer for more coffee and sweets. I will introduce Dr. Wheeler, our first speaker and fellow director of the Brain Cancer Group, and of course my mentor. Dr. Wheeler is a head of medical oncology at Royal North Shore Hospital, and everyone in the audience I'm sure knows who Helen is. And Helen will be talking to us about and giving us an overview on clinical trials in brain cancers. Welcome, Helen.
I haven't done a talk since 2019, pre-COVID, so I apologise for spelling, organisation, and the fact that I finished it at midday. So this is just a general overview. I know that there's so much in the media at the moment about trials, about new inventions, what's on television, And I haven't really gone into specifics. I've gone into really the overview of how and why trials are organised, a bit of 2 past trials that we've been involved in, which have basically changed the management of brain tumours by their completion, and some just generalisations. So there will be a chance for Q&A for specifics once we finish the session. So first thing you should ask is, why are they doing clinical trials? Is it just to waste patients and time and money and effort? What's involved in these clinical trials, and how desperately can we make these more efficient? How can we make them cheaper for pharma to run and get results under 10 years for patients and put them on the map? And at the moment, we just need to understand a little bit about brain cancer, and they can't really, a cluster of cancer cells can't get beyond 1 millimetre in size, and that's about the size of the top of your fingernail, unless they interact with the environment and the soil they're growing in. And they get nutrients from this environment, and they send out signals to the environment and to drag in molecules that they need to promote growth. And they also send out signals to shut down immune attack. And our brain is normally a pretty defensive organ, so that we don't get infection, we don't get virus, we don't get toxins going up there. And these immune cells are really paralysed by what the cancer cells send out and what the microenvironment sends out. Certain factors that the bad guys send out will allow the adjacent supporting cells, like if you don't water your hydrangea during summer, it will die. And if these cancer cells can't get all the nutrients, oxygen, etc., from the environment they're living in, they will also die. So cancer cells can outsmart and work out what they need, and then induce everything around it to come in and supply them, and give them molecules that allow them to divide quickly and spread throughout the brain. And we don't just need to understand the computer, the molecular makeup of the cancer cell. We need now to understand the environment in which they're growing. Because if we can't find something that Subo will talk about in her talk, molecules that are going to attack the bad guys, we may be able to modify the environment and not block the nutrients that they're all needing, and therefore they will die because we've deprived them of things that they need from their surroundings. Treating brain cancer really needs to be a multi-pronged attack. It's just not the medical oncologist, the surgeon, the radiation oncologist, all the fantastic imaging people that we've got. We all need to get together, and every case that comes through our team at North Shore, we have a very, shall I say, vivid, heated debate on a Wednesday morning when everyone puts in their 2 bobs worth of how is this patient going, what should we do about it? And, there's winners and losers, and sometimes we just have to call a truce at about 11 o'clock. Technology has allowed huge developments that impact on our understanding of cancer cells and biology, but so far it hasn't led to any major breakthroughs in treatment. There's fantastic new imaging tools that have been developed and give us a better understanding of where these cancers lie in the brain, and guide our surgeons and radiation oncologists of where they should be hitting the target. And then we've got new molecular biology tools. There are over 100 different kinds of cancer that start from brain tissue. They may look all the same down the microscope, but until we send them off for analysis at a molecular level, they may be completely different. And therefore, understanding and knowing these things may allow us to say this group are going to respond to this treatment, this group are going to respond to that treatment, much better. So having these new molecular tools available and having these new technologies available have made improvements in the outcome for patients with brain cancer over the last 5 years, say, whereas I've heard a lot on the radio that nothing's changed in 20, but it certainly has. And it also, knowing how these tumours are made up, may allow us to give more personalised treatment to a certain group of patients that have one factor versus another factor. But we still have few clues as to who gets these cancers, who gets them, and we must accept, unlike other cancer, if you get a cancer in the breast or the colon or on the skin, often a surgeon can very successfully remove the cancerous tissue and a margin of good cells where they might be hiding around the edges. You can't do that for brain cancer. You'll cause too much damage to healthy brain tissue and you'll leave patients in a very incapacitated way. And having a survivor in a wheelchair that can't talk for the rest of their life is really a very poor outcome for people. So given that we can't really send our surgeons in there to take the whole lot out, we have to develop other techniques for trying to get on top of the disease. And we know these tumours also have a huge impact not only on the patient, but the families, the friends, and have a major impact on those patients that are long-term survivors. And we have not a lot of support for long-term survivors. The aim of any treatment that we do in medicine is to get people better and then get them back to as functioning as they can possibly be. And that's that end, you know, I'm a survivor, but I can't go to work because I can't drive, or I can't see that well, or I need an extra support device. It's been very, very hard, especially with some of the decisions that are hopefully now being reversed by the NDIS, to get the kinds of supports to get these people back to the best functioning capacity they can be. And what is the best rehabilitation for someone who's had deficits from brain cancer? Is it the same as a guy that broke his leg in a motorbike accident? Is it the same as someone had a minor head trauma? Or do we need some much more specialised rehabilitation for patients that are long-term survivors? So most of the clinical trials we talk about are initiated by big pharma companies. And a recent estimate of how much does it take for someone to discover a new molecule in the lab, design a drug that may target that molecule, and then eventually make it into the clinic where we can prescribe it for the appropriate patients is $2 billion. And that means that big pharma always wants some kind of financial return for their shareholders. And new drugs that are now starting to reach the market are becoming prohibitively expensive, especially when you're dealing with a rare cancer, like most brain tumours are. If we're going to sell it to 3,000 patients with breast cancer, it's a lot different than if we're going to sell it to 500 patients with a certain kind of brain cancer. And so the cost of these things goes up an awful lot, and that's why we're trying to make trials more efficient. The majority of the $2 billion that they need to spend to bring it to market is taken up in clinical trials. They outsource the design, the implementation to different CRAs, different clinical trial research groups and things who charge a fortune, often ask for tests that you really don't need every week. But for which we have to pay for. And all goes into the final budget of how much did this drug cost to get it to market. And that cost comes back to individuals and to governments who at times can't afford to pay for it. And the evidence to grow for some of these very slow-growing tumours can take 10 plus years. If you set up a trial, the last person was enrolled 10 years ago, it may take another 5 to 10 years to work out that the new drug you're testing is better than the old stuff that you had. So it's a long, long time frame as well. Before a trial is initiated in Australia, there's very strong regulation requirements. It has to pass a set of ethics committee rules. It needs to pass governance and say that you're not paying for the medical oncologist to fly to New York first class every week to have a good time. We're actually putting money into the trial and we're not being bribed to put people on. And there's audits all the way through. So we can get audited by the government, we can get audited by the drug company to make sure that all the requirements that they've asked for are ticked off. So it's quite a long and laborious project for which we have a very great set of clinical trials staff, and they're assigned trials, they're assigned patients. They will follow those patients through for most of the time that they're on the trial. And often when you're on the trial, you need to do more tests, you need to make more hospital visits. However, you get monitored more closely as well, and you have extra support. And so there's new trial designs coming through that are trying to reduce these costs and timeframes. And so really, what is a drug trial? It involves the doctors identifying a patient that could be suitable to get that drug tested for their condition, and these patients volunteer. So you have a consent form which is, to me, far too complicated, often 30 pages long. We give it to the patient, they are asked to take it home, read through it, discuss it with their family, and it should explain why are we doing this trial, what does it involve for me. And then they can finally, if they consent, they'll come in, they'll probably have screening tests done and then get enrolled. There are different phases of trials. Phase 1 is when a new drug is coming out. Sometimes it's never been tested in humans before, so the monitoring for that is excruciating. You know, blood tests every 2 hours to test whether the drug levels are being reached, tests to see if there's any side effects, etc., etc. And they're hoping to see efficacy in these early phase 1 trials, but that's not the point of the trial. Is it's safe to give to humans, and what will be the best dosing regimen for the humans when you start this trial in a more expanded way. Phase 2 then goes on to treat a particular disease at the ideal dose, and they focus obviously on safety. Occasionally, to try and get these trials done quicker for rarer diseases, they will have, say, 2 patients on the active arm and 1 patient on the best we know. So they're sometimes randomised, and sometimes patients will get onto the what we call standard of care versus getting onto the experimental drug. And then when they come to phase 3, they're expanded, bigger in number, and patients will have a control arm. Do we think this is the best for the patient? And usually a couple of arms with experimental therapies on it. And I can tell you 2 patients today who we put on trial got randomised to go onto the standard of care arm and were absolutely shattered. But in reality, the reason why we have very few drugs to treat brain cancer is the fact that the standard of care arms have beat out all the newcomers. So the people that have been on the standard of care arm have done better than these new drugs that we're trying to introduce. And so, but they still get very disappointed. They hope, you know, want to go on to a new trial, want to go on to see a new therapy. This may be the best breakthrough, but unless we have these standard of care arms, we're never going to know if it is the next thing since sliced bread. It must be tested properly. And the drugs that are commonly used for cancer treatments have come through phase 1, phase 2 and phase 3 before they get to market. And there's intensive behind-the-scenes investigations. This can come at a lab-based level. This can come with our very clever statisticians who can look up data and say, oh, that looks quite promising, or that doesn't look quite promising. When you're doing a phase 1, starting off, they start off very low doses. So what a mouse might have tolerated, they'll probably take it down 10 times, and then they will test a couple of patients at that low dose, and then if that patient has done okay, they'll escalate the dose to the next and the next and the next. often with phase 3s, we have the investigators, the doctors you're dealing with, have absolutely no control over what arm you're getting. So we say we've got a 60-year-old lady who's had diabetes and diverticular disease and everything else, enter all that kind of clinical data into a central computer, and because we're trying to test it against one arm, two arms, or standard of care, that central computer will find 3 other little old ladies that have had diabetes and diverticular disease, etc., and match them up. So at the end of the day, you haven't put the Olympic rowers on one arm, hey, they're going to win, versus the guys that have got other concomitant illnesses on the other arm. So the randomisation process goes with de-identified data in a central control, and we get spat out, Mr. Smith's going on this, or Mrs. Jones is going to have that, and we've got no control over it whatsoever. And who decides what treatment I get? As I said, it's Big Brother in the sky. And this is just an example of a couple of trials that have changed the landscape a little in the last 50 years, 20 years in the management. And everyone probably in the room has heard of the STUP trial. We refer to it quite commonly. This was a trial that was initiated by an European investigator in August 2000. They managed to recruit 537 patients from about 35 different cancer centres around the world by March 2002. And half of those patients were given radiotherapy alone, and half of the patients were given radiotherapy plus temozolomide plus another 6 months of temozolomide. Now, when you look at this graph, you can see if we stopped the trial after everyone had been randomised at 12 months, there was no difference for the people who were getting the drug. It was pretty much the same. But when we then had a look at how people were doing at 2 years, 3 times more people were doing better. And when you see curves like this, you can see a straight line coming out the back. And that's what we call tail of the curve. And those patients may go on for another 5, 6, 10 years. We never know. They will follow them up usually for 5 years plus, but they're not specifically being monitored as closely as when they're actually on the active treatment. And looking at these trials, you can see that the results that were eventually published 3 years after the trial had been completed are much worse than we get today. So this is just a very old trial, but to explain that, you know, this thing goes on and on and on, and we never know, as oncologists and having been doing this for too long, who's going to be a winner and who's not. You never know till you treat someone who's going to do well and who is not. And we think they're quite smart, we'll do tests, analyse, etc. But at the end of the day, I can never pick the winners and the losers when I first meet them. It's still very, very complicated. And another trial that hit the headlines and the newspapers and the television and everything else is something called the Indigo trial, which came out last year. And this was for a very specific group of patients. They had low-grade tumours with something called an IDH mutation. Now, when we discovered this IDH mutation about 2007 and got more used to testing tumours for the IDH mutation, we thought, okay, we're going to be able to target that. This is going to be great. One of the problems with vaccines against this is this mutation causes a problem inside the cell. So if you want a vaccine to work, you want it to be like flu, like you've got a big target sitting on the outside of the cell, and along comes your immune cells and they recognise it as an abnormality and they go attack. To get a vaccine to work properly, you really want those targets sitting on the outside of the cells for recognition. But with the IDH being an intracellular molecule, it's been very hard for us to develop vaccines against this particular target. But the clever people who can design drugs and things then went on a big search of something that's going to stop that enzyme from being able to be active. Drugs were discovered, and the first time we tested those drugs were in people who had recurrent higher grade cancer. So they were tested in people with grade 3 tumours and grade 4 tumours. They were a failure. And it wasn't until this trial came along, which was started in January 2020, and given to patients that had slowly progressive low-grade tumours, that patients were randomised to get the drug or not get the drug, and that we actually saw an incredible difference. It seemed to stop a lot of these tumours in their tracks. They stabilised. The drug's quite well tolerated. Few people stopped the drug because of side effects. And unlike most trials, this trial was actually stopped after a monitoring board said, this stuff's doing really well. We're not going to continue the trial. We're going to have a look at anyone that's not who's getting the drug, who's not getting the drug. Anyone that's not getting the drug, we'll give it to them for free, and they can transform over. And with every trial, we have these things called external independent data safety monitoring boards. So as we go through the trial, you've put on 100 patients, the data safety monitoring board will get together. What's the side effects? How are patients going? Is there any signal that this stuff is working and not worth doing anymore? And these are external independent committees. And the Data Safety Board met up for the Indigo trial, and their second analysis of the results were, stop the trial. You've proven this stuff is good for these slow-growing tumours, and we think that we need to now give it to anyone that has been a volunteer on the trial that hasn't been getting it, and then try and go to market with it. So that was an unusual setting in brain tumours. It doesn't make many advances quickly, but this was absolutely a phenomenon. Some of the current trials we've got going, and I only made a really short list because I didn't want to be here all night, is something called the ACTION trial. So they discovered this unique molecular abnormality in children with brainstem tumours, and we can also find this molecular abnormality in some adults with midline brain tumours. When you look at these tumours down the microscope, they're all called glioblastoma, but when you unravel them, they have incredibly different behaviour, and they don't usually respond to chemotherapy. They can respond to radiation treatment. The company developed this drug called ONC201. It was a small biotech, and like all small biotechs, what they want is to be bought out by a bigger biotech and make some profit along the way. So the bigger biotech came along and set up a trial to test this drug in patients that have this very rare kind of midline brain cancer, usually young adults, anyone up to about the age of 40, but occasionally we see someone in their mid-40s. The trial involves 2 different dosing schedules of this drug to try and decide if it's working. Can we give it for 1 day a week or 2 days a week? It's a pill. And then there's a placebo arm, because at the moment, the only thing we know that works for these tumours is radiotherapy. And so therefore we want to know, if we're giving everyone drug that potentially has side effects, is it worth adding that drug in? Is it going to help them? Now, there's an awful lot of research going on, because this kind of tumour affects babies, kids, etc., and they're trying to add other drugs onto it. There's a lot of anecdotal reports on chat rooms that say that this drug might be very useful. Some of the drug has actually been imported from other countries where you don't actually need a prescription or much of a prescription. So it's a pretty dirty field in trying to determine what's going to happen. And I've criticised these guys because I'm going, this is a really rare cancer. You've got no treatment for this disease. Why the dickens are you going to go and do a phase 3 trial with all these patients, which is going to take you 10 years to recruit to, when we can just do a small trial? You've got controls, historical controls, and present that to the government and say, hey, this drug is working, this drug is not working, and let people get on with it. But they don't think like me. So. The next trial that's got a lot of publicity is the Agile trial. It was developed, the trial design was developed by a group in the States called GCAR. It's pretty much being run by statisticians, and it's one of the most difficult trials I've ever had to participate in. The aim of this trial was to try and test new drugs in a rapid fashion. So a new biotech will go into GCAR and they'll present a whole lot of evidence and say, this is how my new drug works, this looks like it should be good for brain cancer. And then they get into a pipeline queue, and GCAR from central US will then allocate them an arm, and they'll pay GCAR to do it. But they'll take 50 patients with relapsed glioma, 50 patients with newly diagnosed glioblastoma, it's all glioblastoma, and then they'll say, oh, looks like a few people have done okay on that, so we'll expand it out. Or jeepers, we've now tested 50 patients, there's been no activity whatsoever, we'll ditch it, we'll stop wasting their money and try and make it faster. But statisticians organising clinical trials who don't know what patients look like and the kind of rules and regulations, the idea was to get these drugs to market quicker. And we've just been told we can't, we've recruited 10 patients onto the trial. Now we've got to stop and we're allowed one new patient every 2 months. And we're going, but the idea of this is to get everyone on and get a result out and just keep going. But so that, they've got the same number of people in Queensland and the same number of people in Kentucky. And the stats people have really got hold of it. And I'm not very happy. But anyway, it gives us, one of the ways to look at this is it gives our patients access to some of these new drugs. It means that a quarter of the patients have to be on the control arm, and we can test these new drugs in 3 different new arms. But it's incredibly important that this is also got a control arm in it, because so far there's been 3 drugs through this program. Not that they've told us any results as yet, but I haven't heard of any expansion phases either, which suggests they haven't beaten control. So we're trying very hard. We're trying to reduce the cost for pharma. If they do find something, hey, we find out it's good quick, and then the cost of them having to develop the drugs is significantly reduced. And the only reason this trial was talked about on television about 5 or 6 years ago, and the only reason it finally came to a couple of Australian sites was the fact that one of the charities got behind it, offered to finance it, and sat on the doorstep of GCAR for about 12 months negotiating. It was just a nightmare. So well done to them, but I'm about to ring them and tell them what GCAR are doing to us. So we'll see how that one goes. Now, everyone, as soon as you hear that a friend, a relative, or even a distant relative have got a brain tumour, onto the television, new mouse cured every day, internet, natural therapy practitioners got lots of advice, anecdotal social media reports, chat rooms, they're all full of new potential treatments. And it's, of course, if you've got a loved one that's got a brain tumour, you're going to look out for this stuff. I mean, it's very understandable. But personally, I try and look up what they are talking about and investigate any promises that are coming through. But, did you see that on television at 8 o'clock last night? And I'm saying, well, I'm usually asleep by 7, so no, I missed it. But if you could tell me what station it was on and tell me what time it came through and where it was coming from, I will try and follow it up for you. So all we can do is try and follow these things up. I get really cranky with some of these international guys that advertise stuff online, go to Mexico, go to Tijuana, go to this and go to that, and just give me 500K on the way past, and promising patients that things are really good, but not publishing results. And there's been a number of different clinics overseas in third world or second world or even first world countries that have been going for 10 plus years and taking in brain patients for all these different kinds of treatment and still not publishing the results. They could publish the results and say, hey, this is looking really, really good, and then we can go, okay, well, let's see if we can get some of this in Australia, or we can save them some trips overseas, move our field forward here. But this kind of clouded secrecy of not letting us know, to me, is I just feel some of my patients have been ripped off. And we have patients that come back from overseas and end up in a very bad state and have been told, just get on the next plane, you'll be okay. we do the MRIs at home and go, your MRI is getting worse. But these guys overseas get sent the MRI. Oh, no, you just need a bit more of this, that, and everything else. So off they go again. So it causes, you know, really hardship to a lot of patients. And I'm a bit mother hen protective now, I've got older. And you wonder if it is so good, why aren't they telling the rest of the world? Why does it have to be so secretive? It just doesn't make any sense to me. We had when I was young, shark cartilage was all over. Everyone who had cancer was taking shark cartilage, and then it went on to some other bovine cartilage, and then something else, and then vitamin C infusions. None of this actually panned out. But, you know, they were, for a bottle of vitamin C that cost $10, some of the naturopaths were injecting it for $130 a vial. And and the other name for vitamin C is ascorbic acid. So I knew who was having it because they'd come in and all their veins would be like fibrosed. You couldn't find a place to take a blood test. But because they said, oh, it was really good in a test tube and it killed a few cancer cells, and this is the evidence, which I actually read, was complete garbage, and they could keep selling it and keep advertising it. And it was very disappointing, and patients were really financially getting ripped off. And there are probably very genuine clinics out there. There are very genuine things going on. But if it's so good, share it with us, you know. Please share it with us. And in the clinic, sometimes we see the most remarkable results. I saw a patient with a GBM who was diagnosed 15 years ago today. I'm bringing him in once every 12 months for an MRI. And I'm going, what is so different about him than the rest of my patients? Unfortunately, he had his first surgery overseas and then his second surgery back in Sydney, and we can't get hold of tissue to try and test out why did this guy do so well and the rest of the patients not. Because by doing proper laboratory investigations, we may be able to uncover a few leads in this area. So other areas of research, so this is just drugs, and Subo's going to talk to you about more sophisticated drugs and trials, but we get a lot of information by interrogating scans. And so some of the research that's going on is, where was the tumour, and if it comes back, where is it going? And are there markers that we could better mark out the tumour for the surgeon and our radiotherapy fields and things? So it's quite a lot of other areas, not just pharma trials, that can be very worthwhile for our patients. So we have an awful long way to go in trying to conquer brain cancer. And we need efforts from every field of medicine and science and statisticians, I'll let them in the room again soon, and to try and get these things off the ground. And we need to work together as a really big team. As I said, we have very robust discussions about every patient with a team of radiologists, nuclear medicine physicians, surgeons, radiation oncologists, medical oncologists, and pathologists even. They come into it a lot and they're very robust in their discussion. And, you know, so that every patient gets a thorough interrogation to the best of our knowledge, and we can try and then move on forward with their treatment. But despite the fact that we have not discovered a brand new beautiful drug that's going to take all this away as yet, we need to keep on working on it. But we have, over the last 10 years, improved the quantity and the quality of life that patients with brain tumours have. And so even if we focus on that, it's a lot better than it was 10 years ago. It's 10 times better than it was 20 years ago, and probably 30 times better than it was 30 years ago when I started in this field. So, thank you.
Thank you very much, Helen, for that very comprehensive talk on clinical trials with theory and practical elements on clinical trials in GBM and brain tumours. Now, next on our agenda, we welcome Dr. Subo Thavaneswaran. Subo is a practicing medical oncologist and staff specialist at the King Horn Cancer Centre at St Vincent's Hospital in the city. She manages primary brain cancers as well as colorectal cancer in her spare time. This evening, Subo will be speaking to us on finding the right trial for you, how molecular precision can match novel treatments to the individual. Welcome, Subo.
Thank you very much, Adrian, for the kind introduction. I'd also like to thank the organizers for inviting me to be a part of this event today. So the title of my talk, as Adrian has already highlighted, is How Molecular Precision Can Match Novel Treatments to the Individual Patient. I'd like to go through the fundamental principles of why we use molecular selection to identify appropriate matched therapies for patients, then some of the unique challenges that Helen's already touched on in brain cancers specifically. Then I want to discuss some of the applications of genomics in brain cancers and some of the achievements we've already made to date. And lastly, where to from here. So molecular precision is basically based on the premise that cancer is a genetic disease. Every cell has a set of instructions called genes, and these genes tell the cells what to do. When we find errors in the cells of particular genes that control the growth of the cell, then if there's an error in one of those codes, the cell can grow uncontrollably, and that's what we refer to as cancer. And of late, we have more and more access to comprehensive genomic profiling. And what that refers to is a method by which we can identify these genes that are important and contain errors within them. And these sort of typos in the code determine how the cell functions and has a whole bunch of other roles that we can try to harness and utilize them for. So then when we talk about matched therapies, what that refers to is basically targeted drugs that are designed to identify that code within that cancer cell. So that code will match, the drugs are developed such that the code in the drug can match the typo that there is present in the cancer cells. It allows, the theory is that it allows the drug to selectively bind to the cancer cells and not to the normal cells within the body to try to limit the toxicities experienced by other cells in the body. The aim of this approach is to then stop the signaling of these cells, as well as to reroute them down a different route so they start to behave normally again. The unique challenges, I guess, in brain cancers is, firstly, there's the structure called the blood-brain barrier. It's the gatekeeper to the brain, and it's made up of several different cells and tiny blood vessels, and its real purpose is to protect the brain from, the toxins in our bloodstream getting in. But unfortunately, it can also be an impediment to drugs entering the brain, let alone getting into the tumor itself. And so Helen touched on certain targets within the cancer cell that the drugs have to be designed in a way that they can actually penetrate this barrier to get in. The other unique feature of brain cancers is that there's what we call as tumor heterogeneity. And what that term refers to is that within a cancer growth, there's several different clusters of cells that contain different codes within them. So they're all sending sort of different signals out. And it's difficult when we're designing targeted treatment modalities to target all those different errors in the cancer cells. So that's also we have to come up with better strategies in terms of targeting that as well. So now when we look at genomics and how we utilize the biomarkers, it serves several different purposes. So the information that we get from profiling a tumor and looking at its genomic makeup is that we can identify diagnostic biomarkers, and diagnostic biomarkers are those that are unique or particular to a specific type of cancer, and their presence indicates to us that that is likely the diagnosis in that particular patient. Prognostic biomarkers are those that help us understand the biology of the cancer and how we expect it to behave. And then lastly, predictive biomarkers are the instructions that we try to target with the drugs. We try to block it or switch it off or try to divert that code along a normal path again. So here in this table, I've listed off some of the biomarkers that we routinely test for in the diagnostic workup of gliomas. And then I'll go through each of them in a little bit more detail. So 1p19q code deletion, it's a type of typo that involves a deletion in two different parts of the code together. And it's considered a diagnostic biomarker because it indicates the presence, it's present in oligodendroglioma tumors and not in astrocytomas. It's a prognostic biomarker because oligodendroglial tumors do have a better outcome than astrocytic tumors. But to date, it's not a predictive biomarker in that we don't target it with regards to treatment strategies. MGMT methylation is another biomarker. It has both prognostic and predictive capabilities. So the MGMT gene is one that codes for a DNA repair protein. But when MGMT is methylated in a tumor, the cell is blocked from sending this repair signal out. So when we expose the cancer cells to alkylating agents that we commonly use in the treatment of gliomas like temozolomide, the effects of those agents accumulate a lot more quickly in those cancer cells. It's a prognostic biomarker because irrespective of which treatment we use, these tumors have a better overall survival and outlook compared to tumors that are unmethylated. But it is also considered a predictive biomarker because those tumors are more sensitive and there's incrementally a greater survival gain when these patients receive treatment with temozolomide compared to those who are unmethylated. The next one is IDH mutation, and as Helen's already touched on, it actually serves all three capabilities. So it's a diagnostic biomarker, it's prognostic, and it's predictive now with the results of some trials that have recently been published. So it's essential for the diagnosis of a low-grade glioma, so it's diagnostic, it's prognostic for better survival outcomes for patients of the same grade without this mutation being present, and it's predictive of the benefit of various treatments. So IDH inhibitors, which Helen spoke about in the form of vorasidenib, and then there's also some weaker evidence to suggest that there's some efficacy from PARP inhibition of that pathway. So I won't go through all of this again because Helen's already touched on the Indigo trial, but the key things to point out is it's for a small set of patients with recurrent or residual grade 2 tumors and who have been previously treated with surgery alone, and patients were randomly assigned to an IDH inhibitor or placebo. And what the trial was looking at was the time it took for the tumor to grow above a certain threshold that was pre-specified. And it was a remarkable result in that it slowed the growth of the tumor, and patients who received the treatment had regrowth after an average of 28 months compared to the placebo arm that didn't receive any active treatment. But this has to be weighed up against some of the serious side effects, which were experienced in up to 23% of patients, of which the main one was liver function test abnormalities. Access to IDH inhibitors in Australia is currently limited, but I think there is some work being done to change that. There is a clinical trial called the CERTIS-1 study, which is looking at using a PARP inhibitor in combination with temozolomide chemotherapy across IDH mutant gliomas, which is currently open and recruiting. The last established biomarker that I want to talk to you about today is EGFR amplification. So this is a diagnostic biomarker in that the presence of EGFR amplification upgrades the tumor to a grade 4 tumor, a high-grade tumor, even without any other histological or pathological features of a high-grade tumor under the microscope. Prognostically, we think that EGFR amplification is also associated with worse outcomes. And I guess both of these points provide strong rationale for why we should try to target them. There's been several attempts which have failed in the past, but I think there's some early phase trial data that's coming out that's actually quite encouraging. And I think the evidence, I'll present that in the next slide, but I think that also allows us to qualify EGFR as a predictive biomarker. So as Helen mentioned, these are phase 1 trials, so they're the earliest sort of level of evidence that we're getting coming through. But this employs a new strategy for treating this EGFR, a genomic change in the tumor cells. So what it is, it's an engineered T cell, so it's an immune cell in our body, but what occurs is that the T cells are engineered and they are able to target EGFR, not only the EGFR, the typo in the cancer cells that has gone, there's an error in that cell, but also an immune marker. So it's got an additional thing that the immune system can recognize and identify. So the reason why in brain cancers this has been hard is because of that tumor heterogeneity that I mentioned previously. So not all of the clusters of cancer cells will demonstrate the same expression of that EGFR code. So as a result of this, these particular cells have been designed to target not only that one typo that we know about in that cancer cell, but also an immune marker so that there's more cells that can be targeted with this treatment. The preliminary results have been really quite promising, but only 6 patients were treated. All of them showed some reduction in the tumor size. But it's important to note that all of them experienced some early immune side effects, all of which were manageable except for one patient who had quite a severe reaction. But basically the conclusion of these studies has been that we need more patient numbers and a longer follow-up to determine whether this is an avenue that can be explored further. So the other trial that I've put in the other box is also another early phase trial that's looking at the same approach, but rather than EGFR amplification, it's looking at a particular mutation in the EGFR gene. So looking beyond established biomarkers, now that we have greater access to sort of genomic profiling through tumor testing, we've identified some other biomarkers that we think also have relevance in brain tumors. So often we've known about these biomarkers for a long time in other cancer types, but we haven't been able to determine whether they have a key role to play in brain cancers. For instance, BRAF mutations, we've been targeting them since 2013 in melanomas, but it's not until quite recently, last year, that we've acquired enough evidence in trials to show and to determine that they should also be targeted in gliomas. So as I've mentioned, the BRAF mutation, it's the same typo that we've known about for years. It's much less prevalent in glioblastomas. Only about 2 to 3% of glioblastoma tumors have this, compared to 30% of melanomas. In the US, the regulatory body has approved a combination treatment with a BRAF inhibitor, so that's dabrafenib, in combination with a MEK inhibitor, trametinib, based on trials that have shown quite significant tumor shrinkage in high-grade as well as in the low-grade setting. In Australia, this therapy is not approved for patients with BRAF mutations, but it is available through a clinical trial. Another rare but sort of novel biomarker we've recently seen with relevance in brain cancers is NTRK fusions. So fusions refers to a term where 2 different genes join to create a new hybrid gene. It's only found or seen in less than 2% of adult gliomas. And the US has approved larotrectinib for the treatment of NTRK fusions across cancer types in the presence of this tumor, based on evidence that there was greater than 75% of tumors with this particular fusion responded to the treatment. In Australia, again, it's not an approved therapy for brain cancer, but it is available through 2 clinical trials. So the MOST trial is an Australia-wide clinical trial, and the Tapestry trial is an international trial with an arm for NTRK fusion cancers. Lastly, I just want to touch on tumor mutational burden. So this is a term that refers to a measure of the number of typos or errors that we see when we test a large set of genes in a cancer. It became of particular interest with immunotherapy, and whether it was a biomarker to select patients who we thought would gain benefit from immunotherapy. The theory is if there's more errors in the instruction manual for the cancer and its functioning, then the body's immune system could actually see the cancer for what it is and start its normal job at attacking the cancer cells. But unfortunately, everything that we've seen so far, while this applies to most other cancers, it doesn't apply to brain cancers, where patients who have a high tumor mutational burden don't tend to respond to immunotherapy the way they do in other cancers. And in fact, there's been some follow-up studies in that area, and we're actually finding that the high tumor mutational is an effect of the temozolomide chemotherapy and exposure to that drug, and we're getting these errors, the tumors are acquiring these errors, but the signal that it's sending to the immune system is quite weak. And so it's not actually enough to get the immune system to wake up and actually see the cancer for what it is. So this is a summary slide of where to from here. I think the fact that it's quite a busy slide is an indication that we do have something to be optimistic about in the treatment of brain cancers. Helen's already touched on the light blue boxes, so that's the ACTION trial, which is for a specific subset of patients with diffuse midline gliomas, and then GBM Agile is for patients with glioblastoma, and there's various different arms, and I think patients can enter at diagnosis as well as at relapse. And then the darker blue boxes are trials that we have called LUMOS-2, which is a study led by the Cogno Cooperative Group, and that's looking at IDH mutant low-grade gliomas, and it's got various different arms, including targeted therapy arms as well as non-targeted therapy arms. And then the other study that's also biomarker selected is PersoMed, and that's looking at a subset of patients with a different type of brain cancer called medulloblastomas, and it's looking at a molecular biomarker called it's activation of the sonic hedgehog pathway, which is kind of a cool name, but it's a drug that can potentially target that pathway. I think what's important to note is that the LUMOS-2 and GBM Agile have a relatively clever sort of trial design. I know it's very statistically directed, but it's got a clever design in the sense that you can add arms and then remove them as you go. And so if you get a signal of activity, potentially you can expand that arm, and then the ones that aren't showing any signal of benefit, you could stop it and replace it with something else. At least that's the theory behind it. And then the 2 peach boxes are studies that are pan-cancer. So what that means is that they're studies that allow all patients of any type of cancer to go onto them, assuming that they have a particular biomarker that's of interest. So, the BRAF studies are through MOST, which is that trial. And so are the NTRK fusions. So it sort of captures those rare molecular subsets across cancer types and looks at them all and gives them access to the treatment. Lastly, the purple boxes are the immunotherapy side of things. So The viruses, we take, the theory behind that is that we take a non-infective version of the virus and we inject it into the patient or the tumor, and then we try to activate a multifaceted sort of immune attack. And then similarly, vaccines are such that we obtain the tumor, we gain knowledge of its molecular composition, its genomic makeup, and then we manufacture a vaccine that can get re-injected, and with the hopes that the immune system will then surveillance, see the tumor, and actually attack it. So in summary, I hope I've been able to provide an overview of how molecular information can be used to better match or select therapies in brain cancers, and how we've developed strategies to overcome some of the tumor heterogeneity, which is unfortunately quite common in brain cancers. I've also tried to highlight some of the successes that we've had to date, from targeting IDH mutations in the subset of low-grade gliomas, as well as to targeting EGFR amplification in the high-grade tumors. I think we need to further build on these successes with combination molecular approaches. So to overcome that tumor, the differences in the cells that make up one single tumor, I think we need to look at combination molecular approaches, but also in better harnessing the immune system to do its job better. And lastly, I think we need to continue to develop and conduct adaptive trials that allow our Australian patients with brain cancers to access some of these novel treatments. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Subo. Now, next we'll have a little break from the scientific talks. We'll hear from Joanne Hüging. We are most grateful to Joanne and to community members like her for advocating for our patients in forums such as these. Joanne is generously sharing her story as a carer for Will, and providing a carer's perspective. By profession, Joanne has been a community and social worker for almost 30 years, and in particular the last 12 years within New South Wales Health. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Joanne to the stage.
Thank you for the introduction. Firstly, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands on which we're meeting tonight, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and I pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. I want to thank you all for taking the time to hear our story. It's not just mine. And I will admit that it's a journey that's going to be filled with lots of emotion, so at times it might leave me speechless. I try not to be, but it can. So I stand here tonight as the wife of a brain cancer fighter, Will. So on September 20th, 2023, our world turned upside down. It all started with 2 weeks of persistent headaches that led us to Will's GP, who I am so thankful for, who wasted no time in sending Will off for an MRI. Will drove himself down to the GP that day. Thinking back now, I have absolutely no idea how he was able to get himself there and back. He was told he had a brain tumour and he was going to be referred to Professor Brian Owler. While he was there, I received this text message asking if I was available to book for remediation. No idea what that meant. He's laughing now. No idea what that meant. I was confused. So he came home and just blurted out to me, I have brain cancer. Okay. Before we could even process that news, we received a phone call, well, I received a phone call from the neurosurgeon urging us to rush to the hospital. So we did that. I'll be honest, I looked at the MRI scans before we went to the GP, and having worked in the health system for the last 12 years, I saw something was there, but I had hoped that I was wrong. So Will's confusion was escalating, a stark contrast to his normal self, but now he was in hospital with somewhat of a plan. Surgery was booked for the Saturday morning, and I found myself signing consent forms as Will no longer had capacity to do so. Initial suspicions pointed to a glioblastoma, but confirmation wouldn't come for weeks. We navigated this initial part of the journey through private healthcare, simply because that's where the GP directed us. Will must have mentioned in his appointment that we had private health insurance. But it was the next steps that had me worried. Were we going to be referred to the best team to manage brain cancer? Travelling 45 minutes each way wasn't going to be feasible in the long term, as I still needed to work and our son still needed support. What would be the cost to be seen privately, and was this something we were going to be able to do, as very likely Will was not going to be able to work. That week in the private hospital was hard. I had to chase down the registrar every time I came to see Will to get an update, and every time I saw her or the nurses on shift, they looked at me with pity and despair. Yep, I got it. This was bad. Lost in a sea of uncertainty, I leaned on my professional background as a social worker, delving into research until I found the brain cancer group. Here I read about Dr. Helen and Professor Michael Back, two doctors whose long-term career focus was brain cancer. They also happened to be based at Royal North Shore Hospital, nice and close to home and work. So close, in fact, that I work in the building next door. I knew that Will deserved their expertise, and advocacy became my mission. I had to convince the registrar at the private hospital that I wanted Will to be referred to Royal North Shore, and I had to remind them a few times to make sure that this was done. Marina, the amazing nurse practitioner at the brain cancer group, even got a phone call from me following up, and that was before they even had the pathology results. That would inform any treatment that Will was going to receive. And this was all because I knew I had to advocate for Will to get the best treatment possible. What made me push even more for the brain cancer group was the resources that would be available to me as a carer, as well as to Will as the patient. Having someone like Marina who can navigate the bookings of appointments, spending time to go through how treatment was going to work, what potential side effects were going to happen, answering our questions, writing a script or pathology request, and just being at the end of an email or a phone call when we weren't quite sure what to do next. As the brain cancer group doesn't receive any continual government funding, access to someone like Marina is only made possible through generous donations. I was also keen to have access to a multidisciplinary team, as it kept everything in one place. And of course, access to clinical trials. Anything that would give Will a greater chance of survival. But what about those without the resources or a degree in social work with a health background? The journey doesn't end with a diagnosis, it's just the beginning of a maze of decisions. People place their trust in the advice of their doctors, hoping for the best. They're confronted with mountains of paperwork, significant financial worries, and the emotional toll of facing the unknown. Accessing treatment, daily trips to the hospital for 30 days of radiation therapy. It's a burden that no one should bear alone. But with the very limited support that's available for people with brain cancer, a lot of people do this alone. This is where the support becomes a lifeline for patients and caregivers alike. Having someone to turn to ease the burden of anxiety and stress makes the difference. For some people, this journey is short, but for others, much longer. It's the great unknown that adds to the anxiety and stress and extended grief. And here we are now, heartbroken but not defeated. Will, my partner of 26 years, he faces a formidable foe. A glioblastoma, IDH wild type, WHO grade 4, ATRX retained methylated. So just based on all of those presentations before me with all of those mutations, quite a mouthful. And we would know up until recently that would have just been a GBM4. But through research, including that of the brain cancer group, we now know that there are so many variables to this disease. So what's next? This is where you all come in. Your support, whether it's through fundraising or spreading awareness, offers hope to families like ours. Together, we can fund vital research, provide essential support services, and fight this horrible disease. A real strength of the brain cancer group is its intimate connection with a busy neuro-oncology service, so it's able to direct funds into impactful programs for brain cancer patients and their carers. Will amazes me each day. He's taken the way in which he's taken this challenge on. He's just completed round 5 of his standard of care post-radiation. I want to end with something that Will said to me last Monday after his appointment with Dr. Helen and Marina. I'm not going to worry about bad news until I get the bad news that will come one day. To Will, I'm in awe of you. Thank you.
Thank you very much to Jo and the family for sharing your story with us, bringing the human side to share with us. And to remind us, those of us who see patients each day, there are many families behind with lots of stories and lots of teas and happiness to come to. Next and last speaker for our evening is Associate Professor Michael Back. He's the Director of Radiation Oncology at Royal North Shore Hospital. He's also a fellow director of the Brain Cancer Group, with a bit of a limp at the moment. He's curated and leads the Brain Cancer Group's newest clinical research initiative, the Brain Cancer Data Bank, which includes an Australia-first imaging laboratory. His talk will enlighten us on personalised radiation therapy for GBM by using sophisticated brain cancer imaging, a real fruit basket, of mango, guava and fig clinical trials. Michael.
Thank you, and thank you for the opportunity to outline a bit of the work that we've done through the support of the Brain Cancer Group. There's no slides, I'm just going to preach. Firstly, Helen Wheeler lied. She is not asleep at 7 p.m, she is still in the clinic. I guess we've seen our patients come through, and we've seen people here with personal histories of brain tumours, family with personal history of brain tumours. Joanne's just given the example, and Will, I know what Will looks like from those images, but also know what Will's MRI looks like. And we study that because we get a lot of information from those images that come through, and we can explore, look at patterns, and try to work out a little bit more that goes on with this illness. Through the support of the Brain Cancer Group, we've set up that brain cancer imaging laboratory and the associated data bank. And we started that about 2020, and we've done really well. We've gathered information, and we're presenting and publishing research data from it. In fact, we're getting a lot of publications from there and learning a lot and getting good collaboration with people around the world, and this is only in its 3rd or 4th year. Jamie Drummond, he's actually meant to be talking tonight, not myself. He is a neuroradiologist with an absolute passion for looking at images with people with brain tumours. And Jamie is in Singapore at the moment as an invited speaker to lecture on some of the work he's done with the Brain Cancer Group Imaging Laboratory and educating people at the biggest neuroradiology conference in the world. So there's a lot of things coming out of this, and that's been due to the support from the Brain Cancer Group, and obviously doesn't come from the Brain Cancer Group, it comes from the people who, like you, who are supporters of the Brain Cancer Group. But we need to change things. We've gathered the data, we've got the information. Now's the time to try to initiate change, and pleasingly we're now getting to that phase where we are trying to personalise our approach to patient care. Now, we've learned a lot about the biologics and the biological makeup of tumours, and we're learning more. And the drug therapies are being explored within that. But likewise, for the physical therapies that I'm associated with, neurosurgery and radiation therapy, we're actually learning and starting to implement and trying to personalise that through better understanding of imaging and also better ways of delivering treatment. So now we're coming to the phase of clinical trials, which is where we can start to make an impact. And different to the $2 billion that needs to run to develop a drug, we can actually get a lot of the clinical trials developed and get some understanding coming through at a much, much lower cost to the community. And we can do that through not only exploring established information, but also prospectively or in advance when someone comes through, registering that data and getting a better understanding. So with these physical therapies, such as radiation therapy and surgery, we're really trying to aim to do a number of different things. One, we're trying to make sure we don't miss the tumour, because you can get what's called a geographic miss. And I shudder to look back at patients that I managed when I started as a specialist in 1996, when I couldn't order an MRI scan. I had to admit a patient to hospital to get an MRI. Now if I want an MRI this afternoon, I'll call Marina and she'll get one for me. So we've actually got a greater access to a lot of this information, so we can use that, and the quality of the imaging is improved. We're giving the same recipe as we gave back in 1980. It's roughly the same recipe, but we're doing it a hell of a lot better. But now's the time to change that recipe, because we can actually do things in a much improved way. We've also got to look at the way that we deliver the therapies as well, and alter that, and develop clinical trials to try to find out, can we manipulate it? Can we change the recipe based upon the information we've gained from the biology and from the imaging? And the final thing is to actually radically change the way that we deliver things like radiotherapy. So going away from the standard external beam where we're treating via a linear accelerator, but actually injecting radioactive material targeted to certain areas in a tumour cell. So that's where the fruit bowl comes into it. I didn't invent the fruit bowl. The fruit bowl came out just by a pattern of associations. The first trial coming through in the fruit bowl is actually an Australasian trial. That's one that we assisted with the development, but has been run in 16 centres around Australia, and that's the FIG study. And the FIG study is looking at a PET scan to try to make sure that we're not going to miss the tumour. So to get more information about where the tumour is, in this case glioblastoma, but we also use these PET scans, these FET-PET or amino acid scans in other types of more favourable subtype tumours as well. But the FIG study has been conducted around Australia. We're an active participant of it, and there's been more than 180 patients enrolled in this study across Australia, and we're probably going to close that study towards the end of this year. It's been very successfully run by Dr. Sueng Ko out of the Cogno brain tumour groups, and we've been actively enrolling patients, and it's gathering information to allow that type of PET scan, which we've been doing on the North Shore campus for 12 years, but to be able to have that to be rolled out to more people around Australia and supported by the government. So that's a good, important Australasian government study. The next one is Mango. And Mango is a great flagship of ours that we've actually, in part way through the initial phase of development and going on to the next phase. So Mango is not trying to work out where the tumour is, but try to find within the tumour, is there an area within that tumour which might be resistant or potentially resistant to the treatments we give, where we can potentially give more radiotherapy dose to that area without exposing the large amount of the brain to a high dose. And Mango is looking at part of the cell which doesn't take up a lot of, part of the tumour that doesn't take up a lot of oxygen, and it's trying to find an easy way to do it. Now, the basic way you do it, which isn't great, is doing a PET scan, which isn't really good if you live in Dubbo or Orange and you can't get access to that sort of PET scans. Also, those sort of PET scans cost around $900 a run, involve another visit to the hospital. But if we can actually get that PET scan information out of an MRI, in what's called an oxygen-enhanced MRI, and make it work, then potentially when you're coming through for your basic MRI, we could run that same scan and get that information about the tumour and find out where the parts of the tumour have less oxygen and maybe a little bit more resistant. And that scan is now really being pioneered and developed through the North Shore campus and through the Brain Cancer Imaging Laboratory's work. We've done the scan on a good number of people. We're gathering where the difficulties are in obtaining that data and analysing that data further. And we're soon to roll it out in the prospective study where potentially a new patient coming through will be enrolled in the study, will have the PET scan as well as his oxygen-enhanced MRI and compare the two to make sure it's accurate. But that's just understanding a bit more about the tumour. The goal would then be to, when it comes to radiotherapy, to really hit that area that PET scan or hopefully the MRI determines, to a much higher dose of radiotherapy and escalate the damage to that area and try to avoid the tumours that might become resistant there. So that's well underway, and that's had a lot of excitement around the world, and that's actually been derived from the North Shore campus. That's been a really great achievement, principally run by Jamie Drummond, but also through colleagues at the University of Sydney. GUAVA is looking at another form of not just PET scans, but actually radioisotope therapy. So it's adding that to a drug called Avastin to see if we can improve the chances of killing more tumour and destroying the tumour. And GUAVA is being conducted by Alex Yule, who is one of the medical oncologists on campus, and he's investigating that and soon to start hopefully developing that. But we're not running that trial through New South Wales Health, we're not running that trial through a drug company, we're running that trial through the Brain Cancer Group, and with the assistance of the Brain Cancer Group and the people involved, such as Dr. Jackie Yim, and trying to get those studies up and running through the Brain Cancer Group, through the support from our people who have gathered funds over years to develop these projects. The final version actually falls away from the fruit, and that's a study called Chimera. And this is looking at trying to get all the information we can from imaging to better and much greatly understand where these patterns of tumours are developing, where they're extending, and try to predict the natural history of a tumour through imaging. So we get the information from the biopsy, but it tells us only part of the story and only tells us the story from where the biopsy was. So Chimera is involving really sophisticated MRI, and there's such things called MRI fingerprinting and different forms of spectroscopy, and adding in things like that oxygen-enhanced MRI and mixing it in with the PET scans to try to gather a whole lot of information. That clinical trial will be exploratory and hypothesis testing, and it will hopefully lead to us getting a better understanding of tumours. But these things are great opportunities, and they're achievable, and they're utilising the information that we're gathering from our patients. And from our patients, and we've been fortunate to care for a lot of really wonderful people over years, and it's that information, every time the scan has been done, we'll be able to get that information and learn from it. And now we're formalising that in clinical trials. So that's where we're at in terms of personalising radiation treatment. I think we're going to change the recipe, and we're going to do a hell of a lot better than what we used to do. It doesn't need big, sophisticated machines. It needs a better understanding of the information we're gathering and extrapolating that not only to radiotherapy but other physical therapies such as surgery. And we can gather that information. It's there, and by using a clinical trial, we can get it in a much more structured way. But we can only do that with support from the community. Support from government as well has helped, and New South Wales Health has provided assistance to us, which has been really well appreciated. And an awareness also of the important need to do things a hell of a lot better for our patients with brain tumours. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Michael. That ends the formal presentations. We do have a bit of time for questions and answers. So we've got roving mics, so if you can put your hand up, feel free to fire away. Don't be shy. There's one there at the front. Thanks, Victoria.
Hi, firstly, thank you to all the speakers, and particularly the story that was shared. I'm a son of a recently diagnosed GBM patient at the same time frame as your story, so really appreciate it. One of the more recent, well-publicised stories is that of Richard Scolyer, and obviously the exploration he's undertaking. And I have no idea which of the guest speakers this question would be directed to, but maybe just some intel or insights to what we know of that exploration, and I believe it's IDH wild-type GBM, but I certainly would love to hear more.
Sure. Dr. Wheeler?
Jeepers creepers, if we thought we weren't going to get this question. Look, we all in this audience understand Richard is a very, very well internationally recognised scientist in the field of melanoma and has done a lot of investigation with immunotherapy in the past. And they've taken a recipe from immunotherapy and they're hoping maybe it would help a glioma. And because they understand so much about immunotherapy in melanoma, I have emphasised to them that what is immunotherapy in melanoma and what may be immunotherapy in brain tumours is not going to necessarily be the same. The therapies... Oh, stand up. Okay. The therapy can be... Everyone thinks, oh, just stimulate the immune system and you'll feel great. Well, anyone that's had the flu for a week or two or COVID will understand you don't feel all that great. And some of these drugs are extremely toxic. And at the moment, we really don't have any evidence at all from Richard as to whether it's working or not. It's going to be 3 years because other patients with the same disease have not had that immunotherapy but have been disease-free for 3 years. And so, I mean, it's a great concept, and by doing what he's doing, maybe it'll hasten the results that we're going to get from it. But it's really early days, and the day, a couple of days before he was diagnosed and decided to go down this pathway, I was on call and admitted a patient from the melanoma unit who just had part of the treatment that he decided to take into ICU on a ventilator because the toxicity from those therapies had stopped the patient's muscles working and he was ventilated for 3 or 4 weeks. So there's something unique about you, me and everybody else in the room as to how our immune systems respond to different therapies. There have been immune therapy trials done in brain cancer, and so far, except for a few exceptional patients that have inherited dreadful genes from their little kids that have inherited genes from their parents, have been a failure. And the other thing that we're very aware of is if we can really turn the immune system on to attack the brain, are we going to end up with diseases that mimic multiple sclerosis and encephalitis that can be fatal. So, great concept, fantastic that we've got someone out there pioneering it. I mean, suddenly the publicity for brain cancer has gone through the roof, and it does go. It's really important it goes through the roof because we just need to develop these therapies so much quicker than we are at the present. But it's certainly not time for frontline treatments.
Next question. Up the back, please, Jackie.
I'm Margaret Schonk. Evan and I have been coming here to these sessions for many years, and I would like to say this is the first time any speaker, or we could make it last year, so you may have announced some of these improvements, but it's the first time any improvement has been noted, other than perhaps last year, in survival sort of length from some of these new drugs. So I'd like to thank all you people who are researching and doing all this amazing work for actually managing to achieve these results. So it's great to see some movement in the statistics. So well done, guys. It's brilliant.
Thank you very much, and thank you to the Schonk family for your generosity and support as well. Much appreciated. Questions? Everyone else is a bit shy. Oh, there's one at the front. Excellent.
Hello, my name's Evie. I'm here with my son, Duran, who's finished the 6-week radiotherapy and 6 rounds of chemo under the care of the amazing Dr. Subo. Thank you so much for everything. I guess my question is just watching the slides. A couple of times it was mentioned that certain things happen in the USA and it hadn't happened in Australia. Is there a specific reason why Australia is lagging in certain trials, and you know, what are we waiting for?
It's determined by Big Brother, you know. I mean, with the ONC 201, I actually gate crashed a pharma reception for people with high-grade brain tumours. Oh, sorry. Oh, yeah. I was at a meeting in New Orleans about 4 or 5 years ago, and we'd had a couple of case reports suggesting this 201 stuff might help people. And I'd been writing to the company, I'd been doing everything, and then someone came along and said, hey, yeah, they're having an investigator meeting upstairs. Do you want to come? So I did. And I went up there and I said, could we get access through the TGA on a special access scheme for some of these patients? I had 2 young patients with that disease at the time, and filled out the paperwork. And I said, no, I'll do all the paperwork. Don't worry about it. And then after about 3 months of backwards and forwards, oh, no, it's all too hard. We're not going to give it to you. And so it's like with the vorasidenib trial. I won't say something because someone's here might be listening about it, but we weren't offered that trial in Australia. I mean, we have patients that would have been eligible. So it's only if they come and tap our groups on the shoulder that they will let us participate. And as people get more known around the international field, you're more likely to be tapped on the shoulder. And it took us 5 years to get our JOL into this country, even though we were invited to the first day JOL meeting at the very nice reception about 5 or 6 years before it finally arrived. And 2016 we went for drinks at the MCA. I remember that. It was very pleasant. And we're all very excited about it. You know, fantastic, because we're desperate for new drugs for glioblastoma. So it's almost who you know, what you know, but also the market in Australia is so small. I mean, we've been running the DIPG trial for adults now for over 12 months. I think we've had 3 patients from all over New South Wales come down, and there's probably 30 or 40 they're going to be able to sell their drug to in the States. So it's a much more attractive proposition. If the pharma don't get money, they're not going to develop any more drugs. So there's this big dilemma that can they develop some drugs? They need money to develop drugs and be encouraged about developing drugs. But on the other hand, could they bring it to market so it is affordable for our everyday patients? So Australia is a bit of a minnow in the market they're going to be able to sell things to as well.
Thanks, Michael.
Jonathan? Jonathan Parkinson's my name. I'm one of the other directors of the Brain Cancer Group. We're all involved with a group called COGNO, which has been referred to by the speakers tonight. Just to speak to your specific question, there is a subcommittee of COGNO recognising that as a smaller community that access to clinical trials, particularly drug trials, but other trials as well, becomes difficult. So I was on a subcommittee of COGNO and we've been looking at that specific issue, and in fact have published some of the challenges of being in a community such as ours that does make it more difficult. So it's a very valid question, and Helen's spoken to it beautifully, but it's something that, you know, as a countrywide problem, and something that or potentially problem, and something that that we're well and truly aware of and working towards.
Thanks, JP.
Should also be aware that the US has got very little access to good quality imaging, and especially nuclear medicine imaging. So in Australia, we're actually lucky to get a lot of these diagnostic techniques, which then go on to therapeutic techniques. So the US actually is just trying to learn from what a lot of these, imaging pathways that we're actually developing and very familiar with. And we've had US people come through our department and look at things, and they ask, and I remember a surgeon turning to the radiation oncologist from Boston and said, oh, you do this over there, and he says, we have got no way of doing this. So there's a lot of things in Australia that we actually have fast-tracked because of the way that we've set up, but we need to convert those into clinical trials to prove the benefit. We think there's a benefit, but we need to prove the benefit so as to get that flowing out.
Thank you. Liz?
Just another comment about doing business with America with trials. So their main brain tumour trial group is a group called the Alliance, and they're actually not a legal entity. And so when you're trying to get memoranda of understanding with this non-legal entity, and there's so much legislation about doing studies, it can take years to get a study open. And, there's a few of us in the room that have scars, battle weary. It's much easier to do business with Europe, but it's incredibly difficult and challenging, and we've had to wave the white flag on a few very sad occasions in terms of actually working with America. And I think Cogno has come to the conclusion, I think, after a few difficult times, that we'll probably have to, if there's a really good idea, we should just do the study in parallel rather than doing it under their umbrella, because the red tape is just mind-boggling.
Absolutely. If there's no more last questions, so before we thank all our speakers tonight, so hopefully we have once again raised the importance of brain cancer and hope that we have increased the awareness of this nasty disease for the general community. We have heard from our distinguished speakers tonight on the importance of clinical trials and personalised therapies based on molecular information, advanced imaging, and how that will influence our current as well as future treatment protocols. Hopefully, with more research, we can speed up clinical trial development and do more agile-like studies to bring these drugs to the market quickly. In addition, we can use advanced imaging techniques that Michael has described elegantly tonight on personalising radiation for each of our patients and improving outcomes that way. We are a small community, and it's often difficult to compete with some of our bigger cancer charities, but that challenge won't deter us. That challenge will continue to inspire us to support our patients, our carers, and anyone else impacted by brain cancer. We invite you to participate in community stories on social media and on our website. We encourage anyone who may wish to share their brain cancer journey and story to get in touch. We love to hear from you. The Brain Cancer Group, as many of our speakers have said, is dependent on community support to maintain our research, our education, and our patient support programs, including our very good, excellent nurse practitioner, Marina. I'm sure those of... Indeed. So many of us on a Monday afternoon would say, Marina will do this tomorrow. You may have noticed also outside a small store, and those of, we've seen quite a few of you already bought some of the merchandise, so if you haven't, please have a look at the beanies and the pens and the cups outside, or make a small generous donation, please. Don't forget, we also have flyers outside in the foyer about the next brain cancer event on May 17th, the Sydney Patient Education and Support Forum, hosted in collaboration with the New South Wales Neuro-Oncology Group and BTAA. This event will be held at the Sydney Mechanics School of Arts on Pitt Street, just down the road, near Town Hall. Lastly, a few more thanks and expressions of gratitude. We acknowledge Ramsay Healthcare and North Shore Private Hospital as our operational partner. And naturally, this event could not have happened without the hardworking team behind TBCG. I want to highlight the work of Dennis, our media guru, Tracy, our treasurer, Ray, our chair, Victoria, one of our newly appointed research officers, Jackie Yim, our head of operations, and of course, last but not least, Suzanne. Without your work, Suzanne, none of this would have happened tonight, so thank you so much. So please join us in the foyer for some coffee and tea before everyone departs. Thank you so much for your attendance tonight.